What is metaverse? How can we define metaverse? Is metaverse something connected only to gaming and entertainment, or can it be applied to business and solving real-world problems? In the era of large language models, is the idea of metaverse still relevant? Following is my conversation with Mr. Metaverse, a leading metaverse expert and a key European public speaker on the topic. Enjoy. Aragorn, as Mr. Metaverse, you are probably tired of these questions, but I will start with the question that's probably asked you way too often. What is metaverse?
Yes, what is metaverse? It's a question that they always ask every single interview, every podcast. And it's a question that we simply don't really have an answer to yet, because there are so many different people that have such different ideas when you give them the term metaverse. I think metaverse is a concept, and different people approach it from different angles, right? If you would ask somebody that is very active in the virtual reality or augmented reality industry, what is the metaverse, then they will probably first think of and explain it to you in the terms of their industry. So three-dimensional worlds where you can actually explore those worlds. If you ask somebody from the gaming industry what's a metaverse, they might say, well, it's the connecting of different games and different game universes into one single game universe, just like the Oasis from the movie Ready Player One, right? If you ask somebody from the Web3 and blockchain space what is the metaverse, they might say, well, it's all about interoperability of our digital lives and our digital, the creation of digital assets and digital ownership. So what the metaverse is really depends on your approach vector. The way I approach it is very simple. A year ago, I didn't necessarily use this word, but I do now. And that's because I've really come to believe that we are approaching what Ray Kurzweil, the great thinker, calls the singularity. And I know that he didn't actually come up with that term. That term goes back to the early 80s. And there was another science fiction writer, I think, and thinker that came up with the term singularity, and I always forget that name. I should really work on that. But Ray Kurzweil is the one that made the idea of the singularity big and part of the current futurist movement, where we look at the future and we think about what's going to happen to humanity. And the singularity is this idea that somewhere in, well, according to Ray Kurzweil, somewhere in 2048, 2049, our technology will reach a development pace, a pace of development, so a pace of change and innovation that is so fast that it's trillions of times, or at least millions of times faster than it is today. And therefore, we cannot comprehend what is beyond that, because that technological evolution will lead to our cognitive ability being trillion times faster and trillion times more powerful than it is today. And because it will be so powerful, there's no way for us with our current monkey brains to understand what is past that future. And so how does that relate to the metaverse? Well, I think that the metaverse is really the phase between the singularity and our current technological development. And that represents a phase, a time in space where we will very rapidly completely integrate our physical lives into our digital lives, and they will become one and the same. Our physical reality and our digital realities will merge, and we will do that through the rise of a whole set of technologies, of which the first ones have made themselves known in the past decade or the past decades, slowly but surely, and they're really gaining momentum now. So that is blockchain technology, which then translates into Web3 and NFTs for digital infrastructure, which allows for the building of a digital civilization or society. Because in a digital world, if you cannot have ownership, etc., if you do not have an immutable identity, then how are you going to build a society? Because in society, it only works because you are Machi and I'm Aragorn, and for the law, we are that person, and we can get a letter, and we can have to follow the rules, and a judge can, make a statement that we broke the law and that we have to pay a fine. And that's only possible because we have one identity. We cannot make a new profile. When we break the law, we cannot make a new profile and then, continue what we were doing. So that's Web3. And then we have virtual reality. I mean, a digital world needs to mean integrating it with our physical world, and we experience the physical world all around us through our eyes and our ears. We take all this data in, but we now have this whole digital world, which only takes place on our phone right now and our laptop, but it's separated from our existence. And for that to really work, it needs to be integrated. So we need to build that into our lives, which is where virtual reality and augmented reality come in. And then, of course, there is the whole concept of compute. We've been building computers. They're super fast at everything, but they're still not connected to our way of thinking. We're using really primitive way of inputting data on a keyboard, you know? So the next step is we're going to have integration with that through machine human interfacing, where Neuralink, for example, the company from Elon Musk, comes in, where we can and then there's, of course, artificial intelligence. The artificial intelligence is not so much about creating a separate intelligence as much as it is about creating an augmentation to our own human intelligence, where we create something that we can communicate with, that we can connect with, that can then help us to benefit from the speeds that we have created in mechanical, actually I should say digital computing, because our organic brains are actually really slow. They're just really, really complicated, and they have, you know, parallel computing powers, but they are very slow. So all of these, you know, developments together is what I believe is the metaverse, right? Where we slowly move from our physical world that is digitally augmented but still very separated into a reality where both are completely integrated seamlessly, and we don't even really realize anymore so much whether we're interacting with our digital lives or our physical lives. Long answer.
Yeah, it's a very elegant answer, and intellectually elegant answer, and very thought-provoking.
I hope so.
I must say, and how the last developments in AI will influence metaverse?
How will the recent developments in AI influence the metaverse? Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think before the show, we had a few calls, we talked, and we keep going down all kinds of rabbit holes, which I really enjoyed. But one of the things that we spoke of is that, for example, Matthew Ball, the writer of the book, The Metaverse and How to Revolutionize Everything, despite being a very important voice in, you know, where is things going with the metaverse for over almost a decade now, both in his books and his publications, he almost always completely ignores developments in artificial intelligence, right? We spoke about this in his book. He said something along the lines of, one of the biggest challenges of the metaverse will be that we have to build it all. So we'll need thousands of developers worldwide to build these worlds and the technology and the infrastructure to connect it. And if you look back at the last 3-4 months, since ChatGPT became public, and GPT-3 and now already GPT-4 became known in the world, we have to significantly revisit that idea of how the metaverse will come to be. Because now we have artificial intelligence, which completely superpowers our human ability to do anything. But if we specifically translate that to Matthew Ball's statement about the challenges of constructing a virtual world, then we can already see that virtual reality is going to do that for us, right? Virtual reality, artificial intelligence is going to do that for us. Artificial intelligence is already connected up to, you know, 3D engines like Unreal and Unity, where basically with just a prompt, a text prompt, it can already build complete worlds.
Yeah, we've seen it all.
And this is just within a few months. It's just a few months. So imagine where we'll be a year from now, right? So artificial intelligence is probably the most important development in technological history for humanity, and definitely the most important development in the last 2 decades, because it's going to superpower everything else. Because this AI will help us more quickly develop better technologies, both hardware and software. It will help us build those technologies. It will help us build better software. It will help us build more interoperable software. It will help us to reduce the computing power that we need to run this software. I mean, if you look at Unreal Engine, for example, it's made milestone progress over the last few years because it suddenly introduced something called nanites, where we no longer have to render a 3D object from all sides all the time, but we can only render the sides that you can actually see. Which is interesting because that kind of technology, those kind of breakthroughs will now not be once every 10 years. They will come every year, every few months, and that will keep speeding up. And that will all be, to a large extent, because of the introduction of artificial intelligence. So with every new advancement, every new innovation, the speed of innovation itself will speed up. Artificial intelligence will keep getting better and better and will speed that process up. So I think that what we're seeing now is the very early signs of us moving into the knee of the exponential curve of technological advancement that will lead us to what we discussed before, which is the singularity. And the metaverse phase, so the next 20 years, will be really defined by that exponential growth, which will be mainly powered by artificial intelligence, I believe.
Coming a little bit down to earth, it's of course very relevant what you said, but when I first heard about Metaverse, I admit it was something like early 2022 only. And I thought it's another idea of big tech to make money.
Yes.
Because they ran out of ideas. Before I started, to learn on the topic and understood all the depth which is behind the idea. But at first it was like, it's some kind of Gen Z entertainment thing. What are really down to earth, so to say, serious applications of metaverse solutions we have today already?
We have to see that's a very important addition you do there to your question, that we have today already. Okay, because if we're not talking about 2 years in the future, we're not talking about 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future, but we're talking about today, then we have to be honest. The metaverse, as is it generally conceived by people, which is an interconnected virtual world that is interoperable, where you can move from one game to another without exiting, where you don't have to log in and log out, where you don't have to go from Facebook to LinkedIn, where you don't have to go from your phone to your laptop, where we just experience that doesn't exist today, right? There is no current environment that is infinitely scalable for infinite users in a virtual environment or an augmented reality that allows us to interact. None of that exists. So if you're holding on to that specific definition, there's nothing. But if you're looking at the subsequent building blocks of what will be the metaverse, right? If we're looking at the individual technologies, if we're looking at Web3, if we're looking at virtual reality, if we're looking at 3D engines, then there's a lot. There's a lot going on, and it's all clearly going in one direction. So one of the things that I spoke about recently, and we talked about prior to this call, is that last week I visited KLM, the Royal Dutch Airlines, and Air France. And they have an XR.
One of the biggest airlines in the world.
One of the biggest airlines in the world. They have an XR Center of Excellence in Amsterdam at Schiphol Airport, where they research the implementation and applications of mixed reality. So that's augmented reality and that's virtual reality. And they use it for some really straightforward things that you probably can already think of if you're a little into this. So, for example, they use it to train pilots, right? Pilots have to do a kind of exam every few months to make sure that they're still very capable and skillful. But in the past, they did this with flight simulators. And these flight simulators are machines that cost, hundreds of thousands of euros to build because they're a complete replica of a cockpit. But the interesting thing with the flight simulator is that once you've built it, you can't change it, right? But what happens in the real world, there's different planes. These planes get upgraded and they get changed. So whenever the plane is changed or upgraded or replaced and there's a newer plane, you have to build a new cockpit simulator, which is expensive, right? All of that it costs a lot of money, costs a lot of time, and you can do a lot of that in virtual reality. So what KLM is doing is they're using virtual reality to train pilots. Not only does that allow them to keep the production of the simulators much cheaper. They still use the real simulators, by the way, but they do this on the side. But also, pilots can do it at home because all they need is a virtual reality headset, right? A virtual reality headset with hand tracking and facial tracking, eye tracking, and they can do it at home, right? So the
That's
cost of a
incredible.
pilot, it's incredible. A pilot can now practice at home for his exam. He can practice at home for the things that he needs to do in a plane that he wasn't really doing very well. And he doesn't need a plane for it. He doesn't need a simulator for it. So their ability to train their pilots and to test their pilots has gone up significantly, and the cost for doing it has gone down significantly. Now, that's a very straightforward example. But they're also doing this for their ground crew, because I don't know if you've ever been to an airport, but the planes, they come to the terminal. Yeah, well, not everybody, of course, but you don't really see this, because we go into the airport, we get into the plane, we fly away. But planes, they land, they come to the terminal, they go away. In that time, there's usually a tractor or tow car that pulls the plane to the terminal or pulls it away. How do you learn to drive a car like that? Well, either you need to have an empty plane with a tow car and then practice, which means that that terminal cannot be used, the plane cannot be used, and the tow car cannot be used, or you may build a simulation, right? So again, great use of simulation. They also use simulations now to train the cabin crew at home. The cabin crew at home can do virtual reality training with just a headset on to make sure that they understand where everything is in the plane, how to deal with new situations, how to follow new procedures. They also made virtual reality scenarios where they practice the plane crashing. Yes, it's a little scary, but now the cabin crew, in the past, the cabin crew would not know what it would be like if the plane crashes. They can only practice once a year at some abandoned plane at the airport that's made for fire exercise. But now they can be at home, and not only can they train what it's like for a plane to crash, they can experience it. And because they already experienced it, that means that once it actually happens, they will not panic as much. They will be more in control of their emotions, and they will be better able to deal with the situation. But it goes beyond that, because what KLM also did is they're building a new office. And because they have all of this VR, XR stuff going on, they thought, why don't we build the office in 3D? We use the architect, we take our board of executives, we take them, and the architect builds it in 3D, and they can walk through it together to see if it is really what we want for the future of our employees. Right? So this is another business case. And the benefit of this is that once you build it in 3D, it's 1,000 times cheaper than building it in real. And you can already find out, oh, wait, we're walking down this hallway, but this isn't really nice, or this doesn't work, or this, and you can do digital twins. So you can simulate employees going through the office, and you can see, oh, wait, we're getting congestion here. We shouldn't place the coffee machine there. Or wait, this fire exit is not going to work because nobody will be able to get through it. And it goes one step further, because they didn't just do that for their office, they're also doing it for the airport. So they did simulations with airport traffic and tourists on the airport to see, you know, what happens if it gets busy, what happens if it gets slow, how long does it take people to get to the plane? You know, so we have only spoken about virtual reality and augmented reality here, and the potential business cases that are already being used today are endless. The fire brigade in the Netherlands, in Twente, and I'm talking really fast, so maybe I should slow down for people, but the fire brigade in Twente uses a virtual reality to train their volunteer fire brigade members to use the fire truck so they can train at home. There's endless applications, and this is just for training mostly, or for digital twins and simulation, but there's a lot of other options as well.
So would you agree that education is probably the key field for Metaverse to start with mass adoption?
It's a very guiding question. But I will say this: education is going to be revolutionized, because what is the biggest problem in the world today, in any country? We don't have enough teachers. Teachers are underpaid. We don't have enough money for the educational system, and we have increasing numbers of students and a decreasing number of teachers. If we look at the current development of augmented reality and virtual reality, and we compare that to the development and the rise of the mobile phone. In the early 2000s, which is only 20 years ago, we had big mobile phones that only had a black and green screen, which was, you know, Nokia 63, what was it? You remember it? We remember this.
I mean, I remember the one that looked like a little suitcase.
Yeah, exactly.
Early
exactly.
90s.
And yeah, and you could call with it, and you could send a text, and you could play Snake. That was it, right? Now we have this supercomputer in our pocket. That took 20 years. Now, if we look at the rate of technological advancement, innovation, and growth, we can see that that's an exponential curve, right? So it's going faster and faster. So what we will see is that the rise of VR and AR will go much faster than it did with the mobile phone. And people say, oh, there's only 140 million virtual reality headsets around the world, and they're not comfortable to wear, and they're too big. But today I already saw a video of what Apple is planning to do with their augmented reality headset, which is set to come out, this year or next year. And that will completely change the game again, and adoption will skyrocket. Right? If there's 140 million this year, then there will be more than 300 million next year. Then there will be more than 600 million the year after. And 600 million is, that's all the working people in Europe, for example. And all of them will have virtual reality, right? So if that means that all of their kids also have virtual reality at home, then suddenly you can start replacing classes where you don't have teachers with virtual reality classes, or you can augment classes with virtual reality and augmented reality. So instead of reading a boring biology book and having to imagine how, blood particles move through your bloodstream, you can suddenly become a blood cell, and you can move through the bloodstream of the human body as a child, and you can experience what it is like. That will be a much more impactful experience, thereby letting students get a much better idea and understanding, and much more enthusiasm and interest in the topic. And it doesn't just stop at biology. You can use it for history. You can use it for geography. You can replace teachers using augmented artificial intelligence, right? We have ChatGPT. I already built courses with ChatGPT. I use ChatGPT all day long to explain the topics to me. So it is just less than a year from now, you'll have the first ChatGPT teachers that can completely run a class. So you don't need a real teacher anymore. So we will solve the educational bottlenecks of having not enough teachers, having boring classes, and having outdated lesson material. That will be solved 2 years from now. So that means that educational institutes around the world will be, one, they will have a big challenge because they will have to revolutionary or they will have to innovate at a revolutionary pace. But at the same time, that will happen, and that will create a much higher level of general education around the world. It will make education much more engaging for students, and therefore we will see an incredible growth, I think, and improvement of education worldwide.
Can you imagine replicas of famous professors powered with AI?
Yes, and although I think that's a very interesting use case, and I'm convinced that it will happen, I think that we have to be careful about completely replacing a teacher with a digital twin of Albert Einstein, for example. I think it can be great as a part of a course to have one masterclass or one lecture from Albert Einstein to experience that and to have this kind of interaction. But I think ultimately we should be a little wary when it comes to completely bringing back people that are no longer with us. But that is more of a philosophical question. I think that although I want to be part of the singularity and I want to live a very long time, I don't necessarily think that being immortal or immortalizing people is good for our mental health, because death is a part of life. It's a very important part because it's the part that makes sure that everything is valuable. If you would live infinitely and you could do everything infinitely, then there's no value to doing it, because you can do everything in every possible way that would ever be imaginable, and therefore there's no value in making choices. There's no value in doing anything. So, but that's a very philosophical conversation.
It is. It definitely is, and it definitely is the case that determines life as such in most philosophical schools and in most beliefs along the various cultures. We've been using the term digital twins during our conversation so far. Could we clarify, or could you please clarify what digital twins are for our audience, as not everyone is aware of the term?
Yeah, so I think that also, I mean, digital twins can come in many forms and shapes. So let me just give a few examples of what they could look like. I mean, if we just look at the word digital twin, we're talking about a copy of a representation in a digital form of something that we have in a physical sense, right? So a digital twin of me would be a digital avatar that more or less looks like me. And that if, for example, we use it for medical purposes, it is a copy of me that represents my physical health and the operation of my physical being in a digital form. So therefore, that would allow a doctor, for example, to do tests on my digital twin to see how my body would react. So, for example, if they need to decide on how much anesthesia they want to use during an operation, they could run a simulation on a digital twin to see how much would be the perfect amount for me to be, not conscious during the operation, but also have no negative side effects or grogginess or whatever. Right? That's just a simple example. They could also simulate the operation on my digital twin to see how the operation would go and what the risks are. Right? So there's many benefits to that. But you could also have a digital twin of something completely different. Like we spoke before about Schiphol Airport. In fact, I don't know about Schiphol, but I do know that, for example, Hong Kong Airport, or is it, no, Shanghai. I think it was Shanghai Airport. Shanghai Airport already has a digital twin in Unreal Engine. And this digital twin has two functions. On the one hand, in this digital twin, they have all the same cameras, all the same security systems, etc. And they are connected to the real system. So if they go off, they can see in the digital twin, they can see, what systems are going off. And they, of course, have a much better way of integrating with those systems, like in a game. But they also use their digital twin to run simulations. So, for example, if they're considering to repurpose an area or to make changes to the flow of passengers going through the airport, they will first do it in the digital twin of the airport to see what effects will happen in a simulation, how people will start to move around the airport, and what potential risks or hazards that might bring with it, right? They can also do exercises in the digital twin of emergency situations to see how things will go down. So that's another use of digital twins. If you would think about a digital twin for example, a car factory or even the car itself, you could think about how you can, in a digital world that follows the same physical laws as the physical world, which you can easily set up in a virtual experiment or a virtual simulation, you can build a car there and you can do it much faster. Because if you're an engineer and you think, okay, we should rebuild this engine because we want to make this part differently. Now, the way we've always done it up until now is that we come up with an idea, we design it digitally, then digitally designed, it's going to be produced. We produce like some kind of prototype version, and then we test that, right? And in recent years, that process has become a lot more efficient because we have 3D printing. So a lot of the things we try to make, we can quickly design them, we can 3D print them, and we can test them. So it's much faster than it was before. But you're still limited by the fact that you have to make it physical before you can test it and run it and use it. And then you have to go back to the drawing board. In a complete virtual representation simulation with a digital twin, you can literally change the parts of the engine of the car you're building. You can do it in a few minutes and you can test it right away to see how it operates, whether it will break, right? So the benefits of digital twins are massive every way you think about it. And then there's a last form of digital twin that you could think of, and that's a digital twin of me ran by an AI based on all the data available to it about me, for example, my LinkedIn profile, that represents me. So that's something that doesn't exist yet, but it will exist within two years, I think, maybe 3. In the future, if you call me and I don't pick up my phone, my digital twin will pick up my phone. And that means that you will get somebody on the phone that sounds like me, that talks like me, that knows everything about me and my calendar and my, priorities. And that person will then tell you, hey, Aragorn's not available right now, but I'm his digital twin, and how can I help you today? And then you say, well, I want to talk to Aragorn. And then the digital twin will say, well, what do you want to talk about? Because if it's a simple topic, I might be able to help you. If it's something where you really want to talk to Aragorn himself, then we can have a look at the calendar and I'll schedule it for you.
Whereas if
the
assistant speaks in the first person.
Yeah. Let me see when I can. Yeah, it could be like that and people said to me, I saw this yesterday. I posted about the future of dating and relationships in the future, because I think that in the future, and I'm talking about 5 to 10 years from now, I think that rather than dating apps, we will have artificial intelligences, artificial digital twins of ourselves dating other artificial twins of other people to find out whether there's a match. So the whole dating process as we know it now will for many people just completely be something we don't even spend time on. We will only find out about a potential partner when our digital twins went on a date. They figured out that it was fun, that they really liked each other, and it was a match. And then they would tell us, hey, we got you the right match. You got to go out. That's where we're headed. And I know that this is something that's really hard to comprehend for people, and people say, I don't want that, and it's scary. But I think it's amazing because it's a very clear next step in a trend that we already see, because we're already outsourcing it. We outsourced our search process for a mate to apps. But now we're doing on very crude apps where we swipe left and we swipe right, and we don't really have an idea of the other person on the other side. But we don't want to take the time to get to know them. We don't really want to read their profile. So we're just making very superficial decisions on trying to find somebody. So it's a very inefficient, stupid process, which ends up in a scenario where top 10% of women is competing for the top 10% of men, and the other 90% on both sides is unhappy.
But what does top 10 mean in this context?
Yeah.
Physical attractiveness.
Yeah, exactly. Which is also ridiculous, of course, because what we see is that ultimately people are much happier in a long-term relationship when they have somebody where they have a physical, not just a physical, but also a psychological and an emotional connection. And again, this is amazing because we can really simulate people quite well using algorithms. And I know that an algorithm doesn't allow for free will, and that's a whole nother philosophical rabbit hole we could go down. But we can simulate quite well human beings with algorithms already. And so being able to run, do 100 dates in a week or 1,000 dates in a week, because you have a digital twin that is infinite and can do those dates for you, will then allow you to much quicker find the right potential partner that is not just a physical attraction for you, but also a psychological and an emotional attraction to you, which will lead potentially to many more people going into very happy relationships. So I think it's an amazing development, right? Look at all the people around the world that are lonely today. If we look at statistics, we see that Gen Z is the most lonely generation we've ever seen as a result of social media. And it's always darkest just before the dawn. So yes, that is a horrible development. But with this new phase that we're going in with technology in the metaverse, I think we're going to be able to solve a lot of those challenges if we go about it the right way, and we can actually make people happy again.
Yeah, that's true. How about digital twins in medicine? This is a very deep and relevant topic.
Yeah, well, like I said already, I think digital twins in medicine is going to be massive. I think it's going to be revolutionary in every single way, because it will completely permeate how we experience medical care, how medical innovations and research is done, how medical operations will be done, how tests are done. I've been working with somebody called Arun, and he's building something called social prescribing, and he's really looking into, you can find him on LinkedIn as well, social prescribing. He's looking into how the metaverse will improve our healthcare. And I think the most obvious cases in the short term are probably going to be mental care, right? For example, you can very easily talk to a therapist in a virtual space. So it could solve an efficiency and scalability issue. For example, now in Amsterdam, in the COVID lockdowns, there weren't enough mental health care people, right? So a lot of people needed mental health care, but there was none available because the system was overstressed.
It's everywhere.
Well, it is everywhere. Yes, this is true. But
especially for children.
Yes, but I think a lot of that is also to do with the logistics of it, because an expert might be available somewhere, just not in the place where you need him at that particular time, right? So an optimization of that system could be significant. So if you're no longer restricted by location, because you can meet in a virtual world with a digital avatar where you can still have that sense of presence, then suddenly you can make a real improvement in optimization of available resources. And again, I think that another thing that will really help is artificial intelligence, because believe it or not, 99% of mental health care is about somebody listening to you. And we have specially trained mental health care people, because what they need to be trained in ultimately is to listen to you without interfering, without telling you what to think or where to go, without judging, right? That's a very big part of mental health care. And then obviously there is the collection of data for analysis, so that a doctor might come with a recommendation on your treatment, or maybe even medicine, etc. But all of that can be done by an AI. It can be done by an AI really well. In fact, it can probably be done better by an AI than it could ever be done by a human being. So again, there's a potential scalability solution there that can help millions of people around the world with the issues that they're facing.
Yeah, one of the first examples of eventual passing Turing tests, though for me, Turing test has not been passed so far, even with ChatGPT. That's just my own personal opinion, was Lisa, which was this mental care assistant.
Yeah.
And it was in the 1960s already.
Yeah.
So the application of AI into mental health care is an old idea.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a new thing. But between the 60s and now, we've made incredible progress on the sophistication of these systems. And with the rise of ChatGPT now, I think that there's great potential. Of course, a lot of people have serious concerns and are worried about when it could go wrong. But I think that we really need to take in mind here that humans are suffering from lots of cognitive biases. And one of our biggest cognitive bias is that we always value the impact of a potential risk much higher than the impact of a potential upside, right? So if we have the same amount of chance for a bad outcome as we have for a good outcome, we are still likely to put the weight distribution of importance on the bad outcome higher than on the good outcome. So I hope that makes it clear. The problem with that is that we very often forego potential great upsides because we are, we are so afraid of the potential bad outcome, even though the good outcome is just as big and might have a bigger upside than the negative outcome. And the same goes here. It's very likely and very possible that a lot of people will say we can't implement any artificial intelligence for mental health care because there is a 1% chance that somebody will have a bad experience. But if we do that, we ignore that there's a 99% chance that 900 million people around the world actually have a good experience, just because 1 million people might have a bad experience. And you really have to ask the old question that Spock asks in Star Trek all the time, or he doesn't really ask a question, he states a statement, because he says how does he put it? The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. That's what he says. And of course, this is another philosophical discussion that we can have to no end. But I think I personally am a believer in that when it comes to these kind of potential technologies that can help so many people, we shouldn't sandbag them just because a few people might not be helped by them. Which leads us
to the last question of mine, or the last issue that we also mentioned in our talks before the recording. China. Right. As I told you, I'm a big follower of what's happening in China, as I see dichotomy in technological development between the West and China. And China is like Spock. They don't care much about ethical issues.
No, China is in that sense very, very much like Spock, because they just care about the whole. And I think that's a very Asian approach, actually. And the funny thing is that in many ways, I think it's a much more emotionally healthy choice, even though Spock is supposed to be extremely logical. I think for the well-being of the species, it's emotionally better for everybody, for most members of such a society, if you think like that, right? I saw a video this week of an Asian man going down the street, and his shopping cart fell over, and everything was going all across the street. And then all of these Asian people, they ran up, and they started helping this person get his stuff together. And I was looking at that, and I was thinking that would never happen in Europe.
Wouldn't it?
I don't think it. Well, maybe some people would stop. If I go out in the street here and I fall over with my bicycle and groceries, somebody might say, "Oh, let me give you a hand," but most people will just pass me by. Most people will just continue on. They won't stop their car. They won't stop their bike. If they're in a car or on a bicycle, they won't stop.
I wouldn't necessarily agree.
Well, maybe you live. I don't know where you live. If you're in a village, it's possibly a little better.
I
than
live in
city.
Warsaw, so it's also.
Oh, you live in Warsaw. Okay, well then Warsaw is a better place than Amsterdam, I think. But
not necessarily.
I think maybe in Europe it's not as bad as it is in the US. I think in the US it's even worse, because people there have this attitude of don't get involved. Don't get involved. It's not your business, right? But in Asia, there's this kind of a collective idea that you're all there to help each other. And I think that's a very healthy thing. Now, to extrapolate that to the metaverse, and also to talk about China, because China is not just its people, it's also its politics. And of course, the Communist Party, which is still reigning and very, very powerful. There's also some challenges there, right? Because on the one hand, I believe that if we have a more of a collective mindset where we believe that we have to do everything together and we have to support each other and be less individualistic, I think that is, on the whole, it's a good thing for the species. But in China, of course, they also don't believe in an open, inclusive environment, right? China is not inclusive, right? They're still removing black people from their movies. Let's face it. This is the truth. I mean, they're an extremely racist country, and they're one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful economy in the world. At least, even if they're not yet, they will be in the near future, because the US is waning. And they don't believe in an open society with lots of freedom for everybody, right? If their internet is completely closed off, basically they still have an iron curtain around their internet. And if there's going to be a metaverse in China, then what's it going to be? It's going to be a closed metaverse. And the interesting thing is that there's a lot of parallels there, because not only do we have, on the one hand, we have China, which is trying to probably build a closed virtual future. We also have Apple trying to build a closed virtual future. And Apple is not just, China is the biggest country in the world, with a quarter of or a third of the world population. But Apple is almost half of the Western world's technology users or smartphone users as their customers. And they also believe in a closed world, and they also believe in control. And I think both of these, the one is a country, the other is a corporation. And the future is really going to be interesting, because are we going to go and have a Blade Runner future where corporations like Apple will take control of humanity through their technologies? Or will we see a future where somehow geopolitical entities like China will maintain their grip on control over society, and maybe China, through its economic growth and influence in the world, will even be able to expand beyond its borders with, the way it rolls out its technology and influences how we use that technology. So we're going to see the next 2 decades are going to be extremely instrumental, right? I saw a video yesterday where somebody said, "Oh, I'm really worried what's going on because Warren Buffett sold all his shares in a semiconductor factory in Taiwan. And America is already threatening to bomb the semiconductor factories rather than cede them to China if there's an invasion." This is also going on in the world right now, right? And I don't know if you know this, but I think more than 80% of the world's semiconductors, which is the chips in
TSMC.
all our computers, is built by TSMC, which, by the way, it's built in China. And so that means that if something happens there, then all of the things that we're talking about and the technological advancement might also just stop overnight, right? Or at least it will be severely slowed down, because if the chips are not being produced and we can't use the new technology in our new hardware, then we're not going to go anywhere. So
I doubt, let's say, an open conflict over Taiwan. It's also a side topic from our main topic. I think that, let's say, it will be rather a series of provocations, clashes between U.S. Navy and Chinese Navy over South Asian Sea, and it's in nobody's interest, to
it isn't in
demolish
anybody's interest.
the Taiwanese semiconductor industry.
Yeah, true. And of course, we can also say, we can clearly see that China for the past 3 decades has had a very clear non-aggression policy. So they have not been actively aggressive to the outside world. They've tried to do everything through diplomacy and through influencing, right? Even TikTok is a great example of Chinese policy currently, because there's two TikTok apps.
It's 3,000 plus history of Chinese culture, not to not to be aggressive to the outside.
I don't know if it goes back that. Well, yeah, maybe you're right. I'm not 100% sure on the past, but I do know for the past 50 years where it's the net, and I do know that there's 2 TikTok apps. There's a TikTok app for Chinese people and there's a TikTok app for the rest of the world. And the TikTok app for Chinese people has a limit on how much content you can consume that is not educational. Meaning that after, I think it's 3 hours, but I might be completely wrong on that. But after 3 hours of non-educational content, you can only watch educational content on Chinese TikTok. And they did that very purposefully because they want Chinese people to be the smartest people in the world, and they want everybody else in the outside world to just waste their time and their cognitive ability on bullshit, right? And this sounds crazy, like conspiracy theorist stuff, but this is real. This is really going on. So, I mean, there's a good reason that the US is thinking about banning TikTok. I don't like the US, and I think that they do a lot of crazy bullshit. But in this, and I know that and the senators that are on this case have no idea what they're dealing with. They don't understand any of it. But the underlying reason is not completely bullshit. There's definitely something there to consider. That in China is effectively doing a lot of different things. For example, also their investments in Africa to increase their influence in the world. And it is completely in line with their policies over the last 50 years to try and influence the way, we consume information and data and their access to our data, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I'm no expert on the matter.
What's really mind-blowing is that having built a closed internet, they are into building a closed metaverse, and with their better infrastructure. This is also what Matthew Ball is invoking several times in the book, that we are not prepared infrastructurally for metaverse. And with China having bigger bandwidth, more 5G, preparing for 6G, and they might be sooner to get into closed metaverse, which is extrapolating closed internet and bringing up a closed society, which is at the same time more powerful technologically than the Western one.
This is very possible. It is definitely possible. I do believe that current bureaucracy in Europe is being absolutely massively damaging to our economies, and to our progress and innovation and adoption of new technological infrastructure. Italy just banning ChatGPT is complete panic move, which will irreparably damage their economy if they hold on to that for more than 3 to 6 months. Beyond that, I think that the amount of damage and innovational lag that will be sustained by their economies and their businesses will be unrepairable. Because again, like I said before, we are in a phase of exponential technological innovation and growth and change. And so once you lag behind, you're going to have a very hard time catching up. At the same time, I also believe that there is a real possibility now in the near future that other parts of the world that are not as infrastructurally sound as the West will catch up because of this technological innovation. Think about it. China is already digitizing its villages, right? So villages that have no internet connection through traditional means like landlines are getting kind of Starlink-like upload and download connections, where a village can suddenly become a digital hub for production, digital assets, but also the physical assets. And instead of using trucks to transport the products out, they make small digital things in these villages, and then they ship them out through drones. So 65-year-old women in Chinese villages are controlling drones to send the goods that they build, digital chips, etc., to the cities. It's crazy. This is really happening right now. This is not a science fiction movie. This is really today. The same can be done in Africa. I mean, an African village or a South American village in the middle of the jungle can get a Starlink connection for about $5,000. If there's an investor or the village comes together to bring the money, or they're part of some program, subsidizing program by the government, they can have access to the fastest internet in the world just like that, right? You don't need to have a copper cable running through the ground anymore across the ocean floor, right? So there's a significant possibility here that a lot of what we now dub the third world will suddenly, completely unexpectedly, leapfrog over the current Western world, benefiting from what we call the law of what's it called? The law of slowed progress, diminishing returns. No, in Dutch we call it the wet van de remmende voorsprong. So the translation would be the law of
restricted
breaking
development.
progress. Yes, exactly. So there's a very big chance that all of these Western countries where people like you and me live, where everybody's super happy and comfortable and convenienced, we have great jobs and we don't need cryptocurrencies because we have a good working bank account and we have Apple Pay. These people are not using these newer technologies, and therefore they will suddenly be leapfrogged by economies or countries where they make a decision to go all in on these new technologies, and then suddenly they leapfrog ahead in terms of innovation and technological prowess. That's a very possible future for the next few decades, and I think that's really underestimated by the Western world. And so the question is, will it be China? Will they be the big benefactor of this, or the big take home the prize with that, or will we see a more distribution because of other third world areas suddenly rising to prominence and making use of this opportunity to leapfrog in technological innovation and infrastructure?
India has just surpassed China, I think, this week in terms of population.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
That's another sleeping lion. No, but sleeping
tiger.
Yeah,
I think.
Dragon, tiger that nobody is really paying attention to. Yeah. The Western world, we are so really in Europe and in the US, we are so, in Dutch we call it navelstaren, looking at your own belly button. We are so occupied with ourselves, and we're so convinced that we are the center of the world that we're completely ignoring the rest of the world, and we're completely ignoring Asia because we don't understand the language, we don't understand the culture, and so we just have decided somewhere subconsciously that it doesn't really matter what they do over there because we're the center of the world. But the truth is that we have lost that position a long time ago, and if we don't start paying attention, we're going to be at we're going to be at the bottom of this ranking or whatever it is, and we're going to be the ones we're going to be on the other end of the stick, so to say.
Unfortunately, I absolutely agree, and I encourage, I think, all our viewers to, I don't know, to look at Nikkei Asia, for instance, from time to time at least, and some other sources instead of only on the
I follow
and Financial Times and all those mainstream media that all of us follow, or TechCrunch by.
Yeah, I think that on LinkedIn there's some really a few really interesting people to follow. I follow Ashley Duderenok. Do I say that correctly? Ashley Duderenok. She reports on what's new in China every week, and she does really nice LinkedIn posts on that. It's a great source of getting a feel of all the developments in China right now. There's another guy called Lin. I forgot his last name. He also talks a lot. He's from the Netherlands, actually. He's actually from my hometown. It's kind of funny, and he reports a lot on what's going on in China as well. Yeah, make an effort. Get in the know, because that's where it's really happening. Forget about Silicon Valley. The real stuff is going on in Asia. That's where the real change is occurring.
Aragorn, thank you so much for this discussion. It was a pleasure
Yeah.
and very refreshing to our viewers and to myself, and a huge intellectual pleasure to having a talk with somebody with such a both wide and in-depth knowledge about what's going on in the technological world today, not only metaverse. So my pleasure.
Yeah, well, I wake up with it and I go to bed with it. So, you know. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hope it's not our last meeting.
I hope so. I hope it won't be. We'll be back here. Don't worry.
We'll be back. Cheers. Thank you so much for listening to Sherpa Search on Tech. If you have enjoyed the show, please subscribe to our show wherever you listen. Thanks again. The Sherpa Search on Tech podcast is a production of Sherpa Search, an executive search firm specializing in the tech industry, helping hire the right people for expert and managerial positions, and advising how to build and develop long-lasting, high-performing IT teams. If you would like to learn more, reach out to us at maciej.szczerba@sherpasearch.tech or visit our website sherpasearch.tech. See you next time.